Welcome back, everybody, to the next fact on the big No Such Thing as a Fish comic relief marathon. We are 10 hours in. We're at the halfway mark. We're still sane. I know I'm saying that with a big red snail on my face, but we are still sane, and we are so excited of how much money we're actually raising at the moment. Let's get the latest tally from what we're doing. 74,921. So thank you, everyone who's donated all that money, and please keep it coming in. And why don't we move on now to our next fact? So it is time for fact. What fact number are we on? We're on fact number 18. Fact number 18, and we're crossing over to Australia now to talk to. This is just so exciting. This is one of the greats of comedy of Australia. He's the biggest name on TV in Australia. So if you're an Aussie there, you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about. For everyone else, this guy is the great satirist of our country. He's the great panel host of our country. I'm speaking as an Aussie. He is the one and only. It is Mr. Shaun Micallef, everyone.
Woo! Thank you very much. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Fish. Look, I know you're 18 facts in and you're 10 hours in, but this is my fact is the shot of ephedrine in your chest that you need.
Give it to us.
This is now. As you correctly said, Dan, I come and you come from Australia, and I actually come from a small bit of Australia called South Australia, but originally, back in the late 1700s. South Australia was actually called Napoleon Land by the French, who decided to name it and put it on their map for a couple of years. And I much prefer that name. I think that is a much more interesting name. I would much prefer to say I come from Napoleon Land than coming from South Australia.
It's a great name.
Yeah.
Do you not think it has connotations, Napoleon, these days, as being of
strength and honor? Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Fine.
You think he might be cancelled? Do you think we'd have to change it to something else because he's fallen from favour?
He was famously cancelled in 1815, pretty comprehensively.
You could say you've named it after Napoleon Dynamite instead. And then,
yes.
Or Napoleon III, of course, the last in France. Yeah.
Well, he was the good Napoleon, wasn't he? Napoleon III. He's loved by everybody, isn't he?
I actually know nothing about him except that when he went to claim leadership of the country, he was in London at the time, and he heard that the royalty had fallen, and he was in such a rush to get back and claim power that he left his bath fully run in his London hotel. What a useless fact to know about an important historical figure.
He was the last. Napoleon III was the last Napoleon and the first president. So he sort of straddled the time between the two different modes of. Can
I ask a question? Did Napoleon II accomplish anything, or was he?
No, he was completely rubbish. He was. I think that was Napoleon's son, maybe, and he died at the age of 21. He didn't really get a chance. He died of tuberculosis. I think that was the second.
Rubbish is harsh, isn't it?
I know. I regretted it as soon as I said he was rubbish. I thought this poor kid,
Poor kid.
Yeah.
Did he live on Elba? Did he live on St. Helens? Did he live in exile with his father?
I don't think so.
I don't think he even got. I think he might have died before Napoleon Senior. I'm going off memory. I can't remember.
You might be stretching our knowledge of the extended Napoleon family. I have to say.
You'd know all this if I came from Napoleon Land. They would have, presumably some sort of resource centre. You could go and you could find out all these facts. See what we've lost. It's a missed opportunity.
Yeah,
you're right.
So is it right to say that it was Matthew Flinders who named Australia the area that we have all the names now, but it was Nicolas Bourdin who would have called it Napoleon Land. Is that right?
Yes, they were. This was before Matthew Flinders did his proper circumnavigation with the Investigator, but he was travelling. He did a bit of a dry run of various bits around Australia, and I think this must have been about 1790. Britain was at war with France, but they gave each other special scientific permits to go and explore things. So they were allowed to do that, and they didn't have to engage in a military way if they came across each other. And what was happening was that Matthew Flinders was in the Investigator travelling from west to east, at the southern part of Australia, and the French under Captain Borden were travelling from east to west. So they actually crossed paths at around a place called Encounter Bay, which is just under what I call South Australia, but what the French were calling Napoleon Land. So the French were naming a whole bunch of things as they were travelling west, and Matthew Flinders was naming a whole bunch of things as they were travelling east. They met. They got on very well. They both realised they were scientists and explorers. They exchanged information. Matthew gave them a bit of his map. And now the Revolutionary Navy weren't as organised. So there were a few suffering from scurvy, a bit of dysentery happening there. So Matthew Flinders invited them all over on board for dinner. They got on very well. They said goodbye. And he said, by the way, if you're hungry and you need some kangaroos or dwarf emus, go to Kangaroo Island. We've just seen Kangaroo Island. There are no humans on it. It's all animals. You can eat till your heart's content. Thank you very much. And they passed. And apparently the French just continued unnaming everything Flinders had named and naming them what they wanted.
Well, it's interesting because Baudin published his names before Flinders, didn't he? Yes. But only really because the French put Flinders in prison for 2 years before he could do anything.
That is very unfair, because once Flinders had circumnavigated Australia, the Investigator was just a rotting hulk by that stage. It was a former collier, and they said, well, if you need a new ship, so we'll build you one. So they built one called the Cumberland out of very soft Australian pine, and it was a much smaller ship. So on the way back home, after there was a shipwreck at one point, but the Cumberland continued on back home, but it had to keep stopping in various places to pick up water. And one of the places they had to stop was the Ile-de-France, which is Mauritius, which they met the French, and he said, Matthew took out his passport and said, look, I've got a scientific path to travel around. I think we'll get on well. And of course, they looked at it and said, well, hang on, this says the Investigator. You're on a ship called the Cumberland.
No.
Oh, no, bureaucracy.
You're a spy. And they put him he was on a home detention for 6 years. It took him 6 years to get back. And he'd only been married a month. It was a terribly unfair thing. But he did use his time in incarceration to write and fix up his maps and make sure that once he did get back, he could publish his book, which was Terra Australis, Journey to Terra Australis. He wanted to call it Australia, but the publishers actually said, no, Terra Australis sounds better.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's so funny.
So it's time well spent, would you say, in the end?
Oh, yeah. I think for the rest of us, and we got some very good maps out of it, and we got a nice book. And, the only downside was that I don't get to say I come from Napoleon Land.
But then I still think that because Baudin published his first, I think he has precedence, and I think we should be saying it is Napoleon Land, really.
I'm happy with that. If that catches on, I'm more than happy. I'll sign it.
The really tragic thing, it seems, is that he, as you say, Shaun, he wrote the book incarcerated, but then by the time he got back to England, he had been suffering. He'd been pretty ill. He died 4 years later. He died the day after his book was published. And the awful thing is that he didn't see it. He was unconscious when his copy arrived, and it was put into his hands.
Oh, no.
It was put into his hands when he was unconscious, and he didn't get a chance to see it, which is just the worst,
Maybe in some ways he was aware that it was there.
Yeah.
Who are you trying to kill, Anna?
I hope so. But Anna, the thing is, most book, he didn't sell that well because, of course, he wasn't available to do the book tour and the signings.
Yeah. Also the title, wrong title. Should have gone for Australia.
Apparently, the other story is that apparently the reason he annoyed the French general, because the French general had said to him, Captain Flinders, would you like to come for dinner? we'll talk about the situation that, you've got a boat that has got the wrong name on the thing. Let's talk through it. And Flinders said, no, I'd rather not have dinner. I've got some work to do on the boat. And apparently the French general was so cross.
Yeah, fair. Oh.
We've lost Shaun for a second.
He was
there.
so cross that he stormed off his Zoom.
We're not mentioning, by the way, one of the...
Right now.
Oh, I think Shaun's going to be back in 1 second.
Why were you about to mention something bitchy about him, and then you
know.
Just while he's gone. God, this guy's going on.
Yeah.
Jeez,
Coming
Flinders.
back in slowly.
Hey.
There he is.
Hey.
Back.
I
Sorry,
was just about to say, Shaun, we're not mentioning another very important companion of Flinders on this trip, which is quite a sort of iconic Aussie character, and that is Trim the cat, who was with Flinders while he circumnavigated, was incarcerated with him, and sadly just kind of walked out and disappeared. I think Flinders felt like maybe he was eaten, but he was an amazing little cat because he was born on the HMS Reliance, and so the cat's whole life was part of this ship. But immediately, as a kitten, fell overboard, so should have died, but managed to swim back to the boat and survive. So Flinders was like, "Oh, this is a great cat," and circumnavigated Australia. Had spent some time in jail.
I think using the verb circumnavigate as if the cat played an active role in that is strong. It didn't come in handy on board or anything.
Moral support.
Moral support.
They love the crew. Love the cat. I mean, if anything, it was the mascot of the ship, and a Trim used to eat off the forks of the crew at the table. I mean, he pretty much got the run of. There's a great film called Greyfriars Bobby, which is it's all about a dog that the town sort of takes to heart when
in
its
Edinburgh,
master
right?
dies.
Yeah,
that's right. In Edinburgh.
Greyfriars Bobby is our Trim.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that that's your Trim?
Yeah.
That's right. So so that was the equivalent. I think Trim was their Greyfriars Bobby. And then when Matthew Flinders thought that the French had eaten his cat, which is it's a big. I don't know whether that should have been the first place he went to. When his cat was thought to be eaten, he was very depressed, and as you say, Dan, very ill, very, very ill. And it never really recovered himself. So and then dying just as his book gets published. It's not a good third act.
Again, we can't attribute the long illness and the death solely to the cat, but probably did play a role. Am I making this up? Didn't he write either in prison or on board the boat? He wrote a biography of Trim, didn't he? I think, or a poem. I think he wrote a poem to Trim.
Yeah, he liked Trim a bit too much, but it's a long time.
It was OCT.
They'd actually formed a friendship, I think, when Matthew Flinders sailed with Captain Bligh. They used to go to Tahiti and get the breadfruit, which obviously you would know is they're getting to feed the slaves in Jamaica. And so Bligh goes there once, and it doesn't work out well for him with Fletcher Christian, and he has to leave in a boat and find his way back. But eventually they end up back in Tahiti, Bligh, with Flinders. They get the breadfruit, they take it to Jamaica, and apparently the slaves didn't like it. The taste of the breadfruit was appalling, so they didn't eat it.
Wow.
I think it is quite gross, though, isn't it?
Yeah, depends what sauce you put on it.
Good point.
Like anything.
I don't know whether the slaves got a choice of condiment. I don't know.
I have always found it weird in Australia because Flinders is obviously a massive name. Half of Australia is named after him, or half of that part of Australia. And if you do interrogate people as to what they know about him, you very quickly realise the only thing people really know about him is about his cat Trim. The cat, I would say, is close to being as famous.
Yeah, but that cat circumnavigated the continent.
Yeah.
It wrote the book. Did it write the book? I can't remember what we said now. Yeah.
It's got its own statue here, bizarrely. I remember walking past it in Euston Station.
Euston Station.
Oddly,
Anna,
I think Flinders and his cat.
I think I know why the statue is in Euston, Anna, which is that Flinders turned up last year This is really exciting. So we're building Shaun, we're building a train line at the moment. It's called HS2. All you need to know is it's going really well. It's on time and under budget.
Andy is really excited about it, by the sounds of it.
Hugely excited.
Really excited.
Yeah, so they're having to dig up half the countryside in order to build this incredibly useful railway. And there was a graveyard very near Euston Station where he was believed to be. He was believed to be either under the station. His coffin, was in an old graveyard, either under Euston Station directly or nearby. And it turns out he was nearby, and there was almost no chance of him being recognised. But thank goodness, his coffin had a metal plate stating who he was, and it wasn't it wasn't a tin plate or something. Which was much more common at the time. It was a lead plate, meaning the lettering had survived, and he has been taken back to the village. Well, ironically, after travelling so far, so many thousands of miles, he's been taken to the tiny village where he was baptised as a baby, and he's been reburied there. So I think that's why it's at Euston, Anna. Yeah,
wow,
that's incredible.
That's very interesting, and what a happy ending. There's the third act bit at the end. We need to make it all worthwhile.
Yeah. I should say, even though I just said half of Australia is named after him, he never named anything after himself, did he?
He was very modest. He was very modest. He would he did run out of. I mean, when you get to an island, you call it Kangaroo Island because there are kangaroos on it. I mean, you kind of run out of. You've run out of inspiration. But yes, every sister of his wife, every friend that he had, everybody in Admiralty he wanted to impress, they all got named. Even members of his crew. But yes, you're quite right, Anna. He never thought to name any place after himself. I think he might have named one place after his brother, who of course was named Flinders, but it wasn't him, it was his brother.
Yeah, do we think that's a bit whoa?
There we go.
That's better.
That felt suspicious to me, Flinders Island. When he calls it Flinders Island, everyone says, "Oh, I thought you didn't name stuff after yourself." Isn't that? No, it's my brother. It's my. Also, anyone check this brother existed?
I named it after my cat, who's surname Trim Flinders. But he that Kangaroo Island, it was because it was full of kangaroos. But basically, they had a really good meal of kangaroos there, right? There's just when they went there, they just ate as many kangaroos as they could get. So it's almost like the name of a restaurant rather than the name of the island.
Yeah, and it was a takeaway. They had a doggy bag. They took away about 100 kangaroos and as many dwarf emus. In fact, his restaurant recommendation, 4 stars, TripAdvisor to Captain Borden to go to Kangaroo Island and eat his fill. They loaded up their boat with a whole bunch of dwarf emus and kangaroos and took them back to Paris. So I think for a time there, in someone's menagerie, let's assume they were wandering around Le Notre's gardens in Versailles, but there were dwarf emus and kangaroos to be seen by those with a bit of money in Paris.
But that was Napoleon's wife, Josephine. This is the really nice thing about this fact, is that Napoleon was an Aussie obsessive, and he sort of authorised the Baudin mission, as you said. And when these kangaroos and emus and black swans, they were huge, plus one wombat that survived the journey, these were all brought back by the Baudin expedition. And this is the incredible thing. The journey back, they were fed, all these animals were fed exclusively on bread soaked in wine for 6 months. That was all they ate. And this many, enough survived.
What is the logic of that? I mean, it's not good for the animals, and it's an enormous waste of wine. These ideas.
Does it keep them docile, does it, the red wine? Or
it might do. Maybe hydrate it. I don't know.
They got there and they were pissed.
Yeah.
Wasn't he, when he was exiled, Napoleon, to, was it Elba?
Elba the first time, St. Helena the next time.
Yeah, it was one of the two. Didn't he sort of befriend an Australian family that were over there? I think
St. Helena.
Yeah, and it's the subject of a Thomas Keneally novel, I think, one of the last few ones he did. There was this little girl that he sort of made really good friends with, and
really?
he had a lot of Aussie connections, old Napoleon, so I can see. Why.
Well, isn't Aussie French for friend? Maybe that's why it's called
Moi Aussie. There was going to be a Napoleon Land in France, just outside of Paris in 2012. There was talk of making a theme park based on Napoleon, which would have been called Napoleon Land. And as far as I know, it definitely hasn't been built. I assume the plans are on ice. They said they wouldn't be trivializing French history because that's what people were worried about. But yeah, Napoleon themed.
What's the height restriction for the ride?
Yeah, we've got to go to the ad on that.
James, did you read any more about Napoleon Land? It sounds insane. That because they wanted to recreate Napoleon's whole life, all the different bits of it. So they were going to have a huge model pyramid and a sphinx for the Egyptian campaign, and they were going to reenact the Battle of Montereau, which was nearby daily. And they were going to do the Revolution experience where you, as the park visitor, would be freed from the Bastille.
Wow. Was Waterloo a water slide? Were they going to work that?
Yeah. They were going to have an indoor ski dome for the Moscow campaign where you would ski between the Russian and the French forces with cannons firing on either side. I mean, this didn't happen, and I hope it does one day. It sounds amazing.
It does sound amazing.
And it certainly doesn't sound like it's trivializing it to me.
It sounds wonderful. Is Euro Disney still a thing? Does that still exist outside of Paris? Well, that sounds like a very easy add-on, doesn't it? I mean, it's just another little kingdom they could put on the back of it.
Just cut off the ears and put a triangle hat on it.
Sure.
Mickey Mouse.
Are you from South Australia, Shaun? Where are you from?
Yes, I'm from Adelaide in South Australia. We had, when I was embarking on my tertiary education, there were two universities. One was Adelaide University and one was Flinders University. So you're right, Anna, he's extraordinarily popular. And when in doubt, you just put Flinders on something because he did it.
It's an easy rule. I didn't realise, and this is the kind of thing that's going to be profoundly obvious to any Australian listeners. I had no idea that South Australia was never a convict state. I didn't know.
Oh, yes. Yes, we're very, very proud of that.
You must be so proud of it. I almost can't believe I wasn't sort of, propagandized more when I lived there, which was only for a year. Otherwise, I would know.
What were you doing there, Anna? What were you?
She was in prison.
My husband's from Tasmania, so I did an obligatory year as a sort of modern day convict, and then we now live here.
Okay.
So,
well, certainly Tasmania had its share of convicts there, but yes, South Australia very proudly. My mother would often remind me. She said, "Well, your relatives. I mean, we could trace the family back to some of the." I think they were called pensioner guards that came over guarding the convicts to Western Australia, and the convicts built the city as that tended to be the fate of all the convicts was to build where they were going to live, and she is very, very proud of the fact that there are no convicts in our lineage, and and everybody from Adelaide, and also a lot of the time I was thought to be English simply because apparently Adelaide has the poshest accent.
Oh, well, that's because no criminal lineage turns out.
That's right.
But yeah, interesting. The brainchild of someone called Edward Gibbon Wakefield, who thought it would be it's thought that people should go there and basically work the land, right? And they should set up a whole new society of tradespeople and artisans and stuff. And they went there, and I think they thought because it's free people living there, not convicts, they didn't have a prison. And I think because they thought no one's going to commit a crime, and then within the year, I think there'd been a murder and an attempted murder and some other stuff, and they built a prison quite quickly.
Yeah, we've made up for it since. I think. The other thing, yes, indeed, all of Australia was a bit of a social experiment because the original idea when the settlement began was that there would be no alcohol. It would be I think having just come from the gin craze, it was thought that maybe Australia might benefit from there being no alcohol at all. I don't think there was even going to be currency. It was just going to be a whole new perfect utopia. And of course, the mariners bringing over the convicts said, well, hang on a minute, we need a bit of rum. We need some rum for ourselves. So that was conceded as perhaps a necessity. And of course, that ended up, as you probably know, being the form of currency that existed. And there was terrible corruption that came as a result of that. But if only Australia never had any alcohol, it would be a very different place.
It wouldn't be as fun. Come on. It is a kind. I mean, you haven't done badly on the utopia front. You've got a lot of our scarpering off to Australia. It's pretty great.
Well, thank you. I mean, I was saying to Dan earlier that we're in a fortunate position now compared with the rest of the world in that we're able to pop along in the street without wearing a mask and pop into a restaurant without a mask. We're allowed to go places, and that relative to everything that's happening in the world, including your country, we're very fortunate to be as small and moved such a large country with such a small population. So yeah, we're kind of benefiting now, but it's taken a long time.
Yeah. Adelaide was named after the wife of William IV, of course. Those two kind of didn't really get on that well. They weren't a perfect couple, I would say. When they got married, Adelaide, she was extremely religious and she took the whole thing really, really seriously, whereas William just hated the whole thing and just started acting the fool all the way through and just sort of making fun of the priest and all that kind of stuff.
In the ceremony. About the marriage in general. No, you mean the
yeah.
Okay.
The clerk of the Privy Council, who's called Charles Greville, wrote that the Queen is a prude and refuses to have the ladies come décolleté to her parties. George IV, who liked ample expanses of that kind, would not let them be covered. So that was kind of the big argument in their relationship, whether you're allowed boobs out all the time.
It's the argument in so many. It really is.
It's the important stuff. I'm glad that was settled so early.
Yeah.
Can I tell Shaun my Mount Kosciuszko fact that I know I've bored you guys with a bunch, but I'd just be so curious to know. So Mount Kosciuszko, Shaun.
Yes, please bore away, Dan. I'm interested to hear your boring story.
Tallest mountain in Australia, right? Yes. Did you know that originally, when they had it in all the books that it was the tallest mountain, that they were doing it with sort of quite rudimentary measurements, and they just sort of assumed that it was. But then they discovered later that the mountain next to it, Mount Townsend, was actually taller than Mount Kosciuszko. It's a huge problem because suddenly all of the textbooks and everything would need to be rewritten because we now have a taller mountain, Mount Townsend. So they were thinking, what the hell do we do about this? We have no idea. And what they decided was, actually, we can save a whole lot of hassle here. Let's just swap the names. And that's what they did.
Oh, really? Yeah. I did not know that, Dan. That is not a boring thing. That is a very interesting thing.
Depends how many times you've heard
it. Well, for me, I'm a virgin to that story. That is a delightful story and also a very, very interesting solution. I wouldn't have thought of that. I mean, of course, all mountains are shorter than they ever were, not just because of erosion, but because the sea levels are rising. So all mountains are. So, for example, with Mount Everest, as I understand it, if you were to climb it today, you wouldn't be going as far as Edmund Hillary and Tenzing because it was higher than sea level back then than it is now. Do you follow my logic?
Yeah, you should see a discussion of this 12 hours ago, in fact, with Michael Palin about the height of Everest. Where...
What does he know? What does he know?
They've recently remeasured it. It seems to have gone up since the last measurement. But yeah, you're right. Overall, the sea's catching up with the mountain tops.
Yeah. Apparently the River Kwai too. Apparently that didn't exist. So the bridge over River Kwai, it's kind of just a fictional name given to a different river. But because the film was so popular, they decided to rename the river after the one in the film. So if you go now, you go to Hellfire Pass and you see, hey, there's the River Kwai, and they say, and there's the bridge. And I think, hang on, didn't they blow up the bridge? What's the bridge? They've actually built a bridge over the newly named River Kwai to accord with the film, but not realised that would have been actually more accurate to have a bunch of debris down the bottom.
That's hilarious.
They were on place names. Do you guys know? Have you read about the process of naming Canberra? So Australia's capital, because Canberra had loads of alternative name suggestions, which were just way more fun. So it was actually named by Lady Gertrude Denman, she was a chair of the Women's Institute for 30 years. She was a really cool lady. But the way it was supposed to happen was it was supposed to be a contest. And so they asked for suggestions. It was a real Boaty McBoatface situation. And it was, people wanted to call it Kookaburra, Bungtown, Thirstyville, Gone Broke, There was one, I really like this. One suggestion was that they call it Sid Mel Adapur Bridgeho, as in basically all the other capitals of all the other states combined.
Anna, did you say Bumtown?
Bung.
I mean, it's much the same, isn't it? Bung.
That's interesting. Because that's a racial slur over here, but it was actually the name. Bungary was the name of the fellow who went with the indigenous guide that accompanied Matthew Flinders with him around Australia. So that may well be named after him. That's interesting. That's quite interesting. Yeah.
Just want to say, did not know that I was saying a racial slur, and I want to apologise for that. Not over here. Something that blocked something up. But yeah, let's assume it was named after the guy. So
yeah. Well, I assume that he was ostensibly with Matthew Flinders to translate for all the First Nations people they were going to meet going around. But of course, he wasn't aware of it, and Flinders wasn't aware of it, that everyone's language is different. You travel about 100 kilometres and the language is completely different because it's a different tribe. So he kind of ended up going, well, I'm happy to go around with you, but I'm not.
How long did he keep up the bluff that he was actually a brilliant translator all the way around?
I don't think they got very far. He was quite frank about it, but I don't think they got very far. I think they got as far as Queensland, and suddenly he realised, well, I'm done. I'm out of it. I'll work in the kitchen. But he became quite a celebrated person. He would often be seen walking around Sydney town wearing uniforms. So if you came and visited Australia, and it was a thing to give your uniform or give a uniform from the particular arm of the military you're from to Bungary, and he would wear it. And I think he might have even visited London a few times.
Right. Wow. Shaun, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up. This has been so fun. Thank you for joining us on this show and giving your time.
I've enjoyed it enormously, and I've learned a lot.
Well, we have too. So much. As an Aussie, I feel way more educated in this last half hour than I have for many years. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And everyone else who's watching, we will be back in just a few minutes' time with New York Times bestselling author Angela Duckworth. We'll see you then.
Hi everyone, well, I have just woken up 2 days after we did that Comic Relief 20-hour marathon. I really hope you enjoyed the video that you just watched. There's plenty more where that came from, so do watch them all. But in doing so, we have a deal. You watch the videos, you also have to pay. So go to comicrelief.com/fish. The link is just down there. And please give us anything you can afford, because all the money that you can send us will be given to amazing causes. Please do donate now.